No sorrows and wrath, by His soul He tread. The sinner right His green on Jesus' silent as He stood at the and small, bowing to the Father's way, He took a crown of thorns. Oh, that rugged cross, now my soul cries out, hallelujah, praise and honor. Heaven, God's own Son, to purchase everything. Inside the very ones you nailed into that tree. Already Christ, what salvation, where your love poured out over me. Now I'm so proud, hallelujah, praise and honor to you. Never day is faithful by the precious blood, by Jesus' name. Now the curse of sin has no hold on me. Who the Son set free, all is free indeed. Now the day is He is faithful, and the precious blood, and my Jesus, there's no more, let's set free, all is free, all that living Christ has salvation, where your love goes, over me. Now I so proud, praise and see your stories forever. Behold the empty. Come on, church.
So this is the continuation of last video 12, because that was cut off because of the recording website that I'm using, and so I thought that I'd redo the commentary on the poem that opens my book on Christianity. So as I was saying, it's kind of Nietzschean take on Christianity, the idea that we're murdering our best and brightest, our gods. Christianity is a religion which enshrines the murder of God, and that has some positive aspects, perhaps, and it also has some very negative aspects. It's important to be aware of both when one is associating with this mythology, in order not to be dragged down, half consciously by the more negative, archetypal, subconscious meaning involved. Nietzsche talked about the gruesome spectacle of a God on the cross, and he had great pity for the higher types who are tortured and slaughtered by the resentful masses. The envious masses. So if you look at Christianity today, or over the last few hundred years, or throughout its history, we see this kind of dynamic actually existing in many respects. Whereby there's an overemphasis or a hypocritical emphasis on the idea of modesty and humility, which becomes an excuse not to actually better yourself or make yourself into something something bigger than others. And we see people today like Marilyn Manson really railing against this narrow-minded, small-minded aspect of Christianity, which still very much is alive and well in the in the United States, for instance, obviously, which something like Marilyn Manson is a living testament to. He felt that it was just all fake and inauthentic and hypocrisy instead of true morality. True morality can always become hypocrisy, and it's important to keep actually reviving, living presence in society, of true morality. Otherwise, it ossifies and just becomes hypocrisy and surface facade. So the idea here is that we should actually see the Christian myth as a very big core, possibly by God Himself, to take a good look at ourselves, and see that we're actually tearing down the greatest beauty and the greatest innocence. And if you look at society today, I think with any honest lens, you see that's exactly what we do. We lack reverence for nature. We lack reverence for the new generations. For those who are most closest to God, who came directly from God. And maybe our failure to actually give proper care and nurturing to the highest aspect of ourselves is in some ways a result of a distorted or not properly digested understanding, and influenced by Christianity and the Christian symbolism and myth. Because when you devote it to a religion which is based on the murder of God, well, surely that may have some negative influence upon you. If you're not properly aware of the negative connotations of that, then also may have very positive connotations, which I'll perhaps go into elsewhere. Oh yeah, and the other idea, obviously, in this poem is that you think that God actually had something to teach us. That it's an enormously, it would be enormously, anti-philosophy, anti-wisdom idea that God Himself came to Earth, and His main thing was just to die, and by some kind of mystery, relieve of our sins, without actually having an awful lot to teach us, and a positive component of education to accomplish. If you look at real life, many people believe, seemingly the most successful people believe, that there's a lot of method involved as well. There's a lot of wisdom involved, and technique and understanding, which is enormously important to improving life and making it worthwhile. And God, obviously, as the fount of all wisdom and omniscience, would have the most to teach us. Whereas the typical Christian message is you just believe and you're saved. That's a potentially enormously vulgar and disgusting message. It's perhaps there can be truth to it, and but maybe there's one aspect of the conundrum, but it's horror. It is pretty horrible that that has become the symbol of Christianity, and that's all there is to it. Seems enormously insulting, to Jesus. I mean, yeah, Jesus, cared about the little people, so to speak. The meek shall inherit the earth. He cared about everyone, but he also would not want to be vulgarized. It's a strange balancing act and a combination of opposites. On the one hand, he speaks to everyone. On the other hand, he is the very peak of divinity and value and and his own nature would be very, very singular and rare and more akin to the few. I mean, yeah, a lot of things one can go into which are not even actually the main thing in this poem, but I mean, the idea that Jesus is just like the King of Kings and everybody else is like garbage. They just all lie down before him, bang their head, and they're nothing. He's everything, they're nothing. That's that doesn't seem to be necessarily the way it should be. I mean, what is the point of a savior who doesn't lift others up? But instead considers them some kind of homogenous mass, to be ruled over, just a herd of sheep, yeah, you know, does a true God and Messiah, want to lift others up, perhaps more to his level, and so through education, like the Gnostic Christians who believe that kind of there's an esoteric message which is directed mainly at the few, or those who it will be the few because it's generally only some people, a minority of people who are willing to actually and able to educate themselves and actually lift themselves up spiritually. So it would be nice to think that Jesus had had some kind of plan in order to actually lift people up who are capable of it, and allow them to recognize, to realize their full potential, according to some kind of really beautiful and profound teachings, which sum up to a new a new height, the sum of humane learning, conveyed by other philosophers, etc. And I think if we look, if one reads the New Testament, one definitely does see some very real and substantial philosophical views being conveyed, and it's definitely possible reading the New Testament to see Jesus as more of a philosopher. And I think that's very, very important to actually consider and really contemplate the teaching of Christianity, the philosophy of Christianity, because it's very, very naive and unscientific to think that you can just you can just do everything by the simple kind of like formula of believe in Jesus and all your problems are solved. You go to heaven. This is an evident falsehood. It's not. I don't think it's even up for debate, because there are so many ways that can be misinterpreted. The test of a formula is its ability to produce reliable results. And for that it has to be clear and have a definite effect. The idea that you believe in Jesus and you are saved and go to heaven. Well, you kind of see this disproved pretty much by history, and because there's so many so-called Christians or self-avowed Christians who they don't turn out too well, either for themselves or for others. There are sort of philosophical issues to do with the notion of belief, and the notion of identity, perhaps, which pretty much rule out such a simple formula, as that one which I described, because what is belief? I mean, and what is Jesus? I mean, it's just a name, it's just a word, and there are lots of types of belief. There's some beliefs which are much more sincere and stable than others, more founded. How it can be is that you basically have somebody who is basically threatened with hell for not believing, and they are simply they're constantly trying to program themselves, or tell themselves that Jesus exists, or that they believe in Jesus, in order to because that's what they're told that they should do, and they think they should do. I mean, is that true belief? Is that a healthy belief? Is that a belief that's going to save them? And is it comparable to another kind of belief, which is really kind of emotionally centered and really sustaining and consoling for a person? how can you draw an equivalence to these completely different types of belief? Um, I mean, what you get is that it's basically like it deteriorates, and simply that you have to say I believe in Jesus or we're going to kill you. It deteriorates into that. So um, um, it's there's good there's real quality beliefs, and then there's like beliefs which are like you know not praiseworthy, and then they have no value. Like, I mean, saying, if you interpret it too superficially as simply like, you have to say that you believe in Jesus, and you're not allowed to really question or think about it and see whether your belief is, in tune with your deeper psychology or something like that. Well, that's not going to be very useful. It's very unlikely. It's very unlikely to get you eternal, bliss in heaven. I mean, why would God reward such, pusillanimous civility and stupidity? Um, so inevitably it seems that you know for true for Christianity to be a true religion, and have any have any possibility of being true, it has to actually be concerned with character development, has to be concerned with the soul in it, or its complexity and actual substance, rather than just one red herring belief or profession of loyalty and faith, belief, etc. It has to be also very much concerned with the shape of the soul, and that's what philosophy is about. That's what the other teachings, which I'm kind of alluding to and referring to, involve. Um, it's quite surprising and impressive that if you do actually visit Christian communities, you often really do get a certain vibe and ethic coming through there. Um, um, despite the tendency to dwell on the idea of you just believe in Jesus and you're saved. Despite that, you often do get actual kind of positive personality and ethic coming through. If you are aware of these communities. Um, but we know how it can also deteriorate, to be completely the opposite. And and it seems that there is an underprivileging, an underemphasizing of the more substantial soul and character aspects, of the equation. I mean, obviously, if you worship somebody who, whose whole, identity is about, sacrifice for humanity and, uh, that great act of compassion, well, you would expect that to rub off in some way. It's also very important for there to be a wisdom component involved. Like I say, what we actually have today is, unbeknownst or oblivious to, the vast majority of Christians. We have, true Christians, true disciples of Christ, or people claiming to be Jesus, being, lobotomized in the house next door, destroyed and crucified again in the house next door. This seems to somewhat indicate a lack of wisdom, amongst the Christian community. Um, And so, yeah, and then I also talk about how, associate, Jesus, the Son of Man or Son of God, with, the literal child, the children, the next generation, because, that is where nature lies. That's where we're closest to God. That's where potential lies. And, it's thought by somebody like Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was like the towering genius of his time, and many other people, who actually who have realized their high potential. That if you give the child the right education, you don't sully nature with your stupid rules and boring schooling, then regimented, production line schooling, then you can create a colossus. Rousseau thought that you take the average child, you give them the right education, and they were like being like the towering figure of their time. They'll be like Superman, because the idea of the Superman was already really present in Rousseau, before Nietzsche, and so I refer to that in this poem. And then, I talk about how every new life a crucifixion, every schizophrenic a new crucifixion, because, although it's very different distribution, in Jesus, like, he was perfect and then he was, tortured on the cross. That's a very extreme distribution of pleasure and pain, suffering, and joy. But, every individual has, a different kind of distribution of pleasure and pain, which is just not as, dynamic. Well, just not as completely separated and extreme as his was. So he had the consolation of being a god. But other people, ordinary mortals, are crucified in their own way by the ordinary degradation and ignominy of human life, perhaps. And it's important to recognize that, and to give ordinary human beings their due. If suffering is a mark of nobility, and willingness to suffer and ability to suffer is a mark of nobility, and and proves a certain worth and caliber, um, then ordinary human beings deserve probably at least as much credit as Jesus got. Um, if we Jesus loved humanity, and he wanted us to be happy and to uh, and save us. Well, then he would want us to recognize our own worth and our own sacrifice and our own nobility of our own suffering. um, so it's not supposed to be sorry, I mean, it's important not to see Christianity purely in technical terms, like how it's sometimes portrayed. It was just some kind of like accounting issue where he suffered for our sins, and that pays off the debt, and we can be saved and go to heaven. It's maybe it's probably also very good to see it in terms of like Jesus is like a symbol of our poor suffering humanity. Just as he was crucified, well, we are crucified every day, and uh, and there's a lot of suffering in human existence. And then every schizophrenic a new crucifixion. Well, that's infinitely more true. I mean, yeah, Jesus had the glory of a public spectacle. He was permitted to expire before the eyes of God and before the eyes of the world in breathtaking in scintillating, titillating magnificence. At least compared to these poor mental patients, schizophrenics, who in fact may be messiahs for all we know, genuine messiahs, because that's what they're claiming to be. They are being, actually just eroded, and having their true selves, their inner Jesuses, their inner Christ, suppressed, chemically suppressed against their will, and suffering as a consequence a slow, torturous decline over years and decades, in complete, hidden away from humanity, where people do not see the awesome spectacle of their sacrifice, or the sacrifices that is being made of them by society. They are, they disappear in complete ignominy, and in many ways that is infinitely more horrible, and it's much slower, which is probably the main thing. So what Jesus went through is nothing compared to what the average schizophrenic goes through. When Jesus was crucified. The whole all the crowds were hanging, in ecstasy and infinite sympathy with his. At least his disciples were. I mean, were hanging with infinite sympathy and tragedy on, his every, wince, every, flicker of his eyeballs. It must have been some consolation, compared to, suffering in complete silence, completely unmourned and unsanctified, deaths in, in true ignominy. I mean, Jesus took the side of the despised and the beggar, and he took on that mantle for kind of, I don't know, a short time in a certain way. But it was only really donning a small fraction of it, because he was always very, very, very holy and sure of his own worth. I mean, it says true solidarity, would to be reborn again as a schizophrenic, perhaps. And then there's the idea of, holy whores. Because Mary Magdalene, as I understand it, she was a prostitute, or I don't know, sinful woman, and she became Jesus' wife, and the sullying and the dirtying of sexuality, the despising of sexuality has been, criticized, heavily, obviously, by a lot of thinkers and writers, in our own more recent tradition. And, in fact, as it's, generally known, sexuality is the wellspring of our energies and our real being. So it's important to have a positive attitude towards sexuality. I mean, and in the in the Indian traditions, there's like tantric meditation, etc., which you use it to use sexuality to to achieve higher spirituality. And and there's also the component of of rehabilitating the most despised, the seemingly lowly, and giving it renewed value and confidence in itself. And and prostitutes don't really do much harm, do they? They're very giving, they're very loving. So, and then our whole society has gone so much in that direction, hasn't it? We're very sexually licentious society in many ways, and most women pretty much slept around quite a bit, and effectively they are on a par with prostitutes by any rational measure. So it's very important to actually to honor ourselves, and actually if we're going to be honest with ourselves and we're going to actually start lifting ourselves up, we're going to have to start taking prostitutes as wives, like Jesus, because that's what most people are. They're prostitutes. I mean, if they're not sexually prostitutes, well, I mean, even if they don't sleep around, they're prostitutes in other ways. I mean, they sell their souls for money. They sell their hours and their energy and their effort, to work for some kind of meat factory company. Where they are, involved in other kind of impure activities like slaughtering, torturing billions of animals. Um, so in order to begin to actually, lift ourselves up, we have to revere what we are, and by revering what we are, we actually begin to care for ourselves more, and take better effort and pains to improve ourselves and our situation. Um, um, and then there's this combination. There's the there's the indulgent aspect, and the hedonistic, you know, possibly sexual aspect. And then there's also the idea of asceticism, which is self-denial. And it's very interesting to not see these as opposites, but as to see them as mutually complementary. Um, um, Building self-control, through asceticism, through self-denial, then in a way that can be construed as the precursor and the precondition of actual, just preparing the way, for real enjoyment, for indulgence, because the aim is not to destroy passion and destroy enjoyment, pleasure. It's to basically to be so in control of yourself and so controlled that you can withstand, and you can open yourself up, become open to pleasure, in a way that it doesn't control you, in a way that doesn't control you, but you retain control of it, and it can become a purely positive aspect, which allows you to achieve your goals and work towards the enhancement of humanity. And it's important to honor both these elements. So, it can be very, very healthy and recommendable to engage in fasts, like in the olden days, whereby you do you may not eat for a few days or a week, or etc. And by doing so, you kind of discipline your appetite, you discipline yourself, and you strengthen yourself and your will, and prepare the way for sacrifice. And you can indulge in that if you like. But then at other times you will, live like a more of a a gourmand or a gourmand. I think I don't know how you pronounce the word, or a libertine, and you a hedonist, and you incorporate a lot of just leisure and pleasure, in your life as well, and because what makes life living, what is the meaning of life? Well, surely it's enjoyment, joy, and pleasure. Joy is basically it's kind of the feeling that you want this moment to continue and go or repeat again and again. So that is synonymous with the embrace of life and the idea that life is justified and has a meaning. So Christianity historically has been heavily associated with asceticism, and self-denial. But I mean, does it need to be? There's also a great, honoring of the concept of love, and the kind of religious ecstasy in Christianity. And we see that in, the church murals and, of previous eras, the Catholic Church and its great beauty, honoring of the pleasure of the visual senses. And the reason that Christianity has got such a terrible reputation, at least part of it, because it became too otherworldly, as Nietzsche said. It stopped honoring the pleasure of the senses. And so then the idea is, finishing off the poem, is that, well, just completely reverse the Nietzschean idea that Christianity has to be, something about herd mentality and, just a pathetic conformity and tearing down of the strong. But, Christianity is in fact, and was in its inception, a hugely, radical and individualistic movement, whereby, he was calling out for, individuals, his fish. He was a fisherman calling out for fish to turn their backs on society and turn their backs on their parents and to radically devote themselves to him and his teaching. And if you want to be a true Christian, pretty much the same applies today as it ever did. Or at least you should very strongly bear that element in mind. And if you take this on board, it completely reverses the Nietzschean idea that Christianity is just something for pathetic sheep. Basically, it's just an Ubermensch who has compassion for all others and seeks to become a shepherd rather than. A true Christian is a shepherd, He's not a sheep. And I mean, what's so much better about Nietzsche with his delight in cruelty and praising of cruelty and, disregard for the common man. What's so much better than that, about that, than, becoming an Übermensch who just actually, cares for, human suffering and doesn't, try to increase it. I mean, yeah, and there are many ironies involved. I mean, nowadays, I suppose in intellectual circles, it's much more sheep-like and conformist to be a Nietzschean than it is to be a Christian. Well, or at least in some circles. So, does a true individual and a true Übermensch become a Nietzschean, or does he become a Christian? May well become a Christian.